You're listening to Seattle Real Estate Podcast.
You know how people always say, or they used to say, location, location, location. The three rules of real estate. Yes, that is one of the underlying rules of real estate. However, timing. We've also, you got to pay attention to that when you get in and out of the market. Because if you bought a home at the highest, price level, say in 2008, maybe in 2007, depending where you are in the country, if you bought that house in the best neighborhood or the worst neighborhood, however you want to do the location thing, and then tried to sell it in 2000 and call it 11, guess what? That wasn't going to work out. Today, we're talking about location. We are talking about the worst house on the best block of San Francisco sells for $2 million. Does this sound insane? Well, yes and no. To me, it's like, oh, okay, let's take a peek and see. $2 million, just having a conversation with Ehud, my video guy, and I read off to him the titles of these stories so that he can do the audio check, and we talk through stuff, and I just kind of half the time just say stuff. So I'll tell him a story about nothing, and or I'll read the title, and he was like, "Yeah, $2 million just doesn't get you what it used to, does it?" And he's from New York, so he's used to insane property prices, and $2 million, isn't crazy out of the ordinary for a San Francisco or a New York real estate market. Here in Seattle, $2 million still gets you a pretty decent home. Not what it used to. It doesn't get you a stellar home in the best neighborhood, but it gets you a decent home in a good neighborhood. It might not be huge, but you're $2 million, you're still gonna do okay. San Francisco, not so much. We're gonna read about that. Before we do, if you're new here, welcome. My name is Sean Reynolds. I own a couple of real estate companies here in Bellevue, Washington, just outside of Seattle, and emphasis on outside of Seattle, right? Crazy stuff going on in Seattle. But Seattle's a mothership, so that's what we're doing. Again, welcome. Here's the story. So worst house in best block of San Francisco sells for $2M, the 2M big ones. A decaying 122-year-old Victorian marketed as the worst house on the best block. That is amazing. That's amazing marketing, isn't it? Because you're like, oh, it's going to be crappy, but it's the best location. The worst house in the best block of San Francisco is sold for nearly $2 million, an eye-catching price that the realtor said was the outcome of overbidding in an auction. Is there such thing as overbidding? Aren't you just really bidding at that point? You might say, well, you bid it up over the price, but you had a willing buyer and you had a willing seller. So, that's the argument. That's always the argument for price escalation in real estate. And yet in the true definition of market value, in these overbidding situations, whether it be at an auction or, 25 real estate brokers all making an offer on the same home for their clients, you've got some situations there that might not technically meet the definition of market value, which is you got a willing buyer, you got a willing seller, property exposed to the marketplace, all that, no undue influence. You got all that stuff. There's some arguments to be made there that what's going on is not necessarily market value on some of this stuff. Overbidding being one of them. But at an auction, I say anything goes. Just, all right, if you want to bid it up, that's your deal. You got to pay. You got to cut the check at the end of the deal. That's your problem. You know what I mean? A developer's $1.97 million cash offer for the 2,158 square foot home. That's 200 square meters, by the way. My conversion into square meters is so bad. I'm just so used to square footage. But, I deal with, a friend in Australia and everything's square meters. And you're like, what's that? That seems small. 200 square meters? What? $2 million for 200 square meters. It's the same thing, right? But it's just how you mentally process it. And this is a property in the No Valley neighborhood. It was finalized last week. So it closed last week. On the social media page, Zillow Gone Wild. I'm gonna have to check that out. Really? Zillow Gone Wild? Maybe some of you already have. I didn't even know that was a thing. So Zillow Gone Wild. Some commenters marveled at the price while others questioned the value of the home with boarded up windows, peeling paint, and an unstable foundation. Oh, heavens, we've got issues with this home. When I see that, I'm like, okay, but if you're only complaining about boarded up windows, which can be easily repaired, and peeling paint, all right, sand that bad boy down, do some prep, get a paint job on there, and an unstable foundation, all right, so jack the house up and level out the foundation. That doesn't seem to me like too much to ask for. If half the home were gone, then all right, then, you know, but I think what we're talking about here is we're talking about people in neighborhoods where, you know, maybe your median home price is 250 grand. Maybe it's 300 grand. I've talked a lot about, you know, last Thanksgiving, I was down with my parents down in Oklahoma City, and I don't know what the median home price there is, but my dad drove me by. My dad's an appraiser. He's still appraising in his mid 70s. He will quit working the day that he dies. Like literally, that's how it'll go out, or it gets to a point where he just can't keep his license. That's how my dad will go out. Just workhorse, just doesn't want to stop. And always, and that's probably why I've got the whole, you know, you work hard and you'll be rewarded. If you don't work hard, then you get what you bargained for, right? So my dad drove me by the one neighborhood in Oklahoma City that was like over $1 million. And they were super nice homes, but you know, that's a median house price in a lot of where I live. So we're talking about perspective of folks coming from neighborhoods where you get a really nice home for $250,000 and a boarded up house with paint, windows, unstable foundation. That's going to go for like 70, 80 grand. And you're going to have at least that into the fix up, if not double that. Here in Seattle, all of our costs are just through the roof contractor wise, because there's so much stuff going on. So let's keep going here and let's see what's going on. So the house, I looked at the photo of the house. I didn't think it was bad. Now it's old. All right. It's old. So you got to deal with old house issues but it's got a lot of cool detail to it. I mean, it's just got some architecture that you're like, all right, that's a San Francisco townhome. You know what I mean? One of those skinny homes that now everything is designed after. And it's because you can maximize the density. They're basically boxes. They're a series of boxes. And as an appraiser, we love boxes because they're easier to measure. You've got a front, you've got a side measurement, rear, and then coming on back. Maybe a little jig jog for the garage, you know, something along those lines. But this home actually did have it looks like it's got an attached garage and also a parking spot. And so we're going to comment on that in a second here. One commenter joked, it actually has a parking spot. No wonder it sold for almost $2 million, and joking, you know, but in a market like that where you're parking your car in the street, not so much. Have you read about what's going on in San Francisco? It's not exactly good. And yet still commanding $2 million for a fixer in a decent neighborhood, in a good neighborhood. I don't know my neighborhoods of San Francisco. So if I'm making comments, it sounds like I don't know what I'm talking about. It's because I don't know what I'm talking about as far as the actual locations. I've got kind of a broad scope handle on, the best of the neighborhoods. I don't know a lot about the neighborhood this one is located in so the property sold at several $100,000 higher than other comparable fixer-uppers in the area as a result of a complex conservatorship sale, said Todd Wiley, who represented the seller. Yeah, but the conservatorship sale doesn't really have anything to do with why people overbid it, right? You've just got a crazy lack of supply. And like this one sounds like it went to a builder or a contractor or a developer. Is he going to tear it down? Is he going to take it down to a wall? Is he going to just do a straight remodel? It sounds like something along those lines, right? Wiley said a judge approved the sale of the house after its elderly owner was placed in a conservatorship. The man's family, concerned about the way he was living, hired a licensed fiduciary to handle the sale with the proceeds going to pay for his continuing care, according to Wiley. We see that a lot. That happens a lot. Somebody basically loses their mind, loses their physical ability to handle themselves. And that's one of those things that I always think about. I'm like, oh my gosh, are my kids going to have to, my kids jokingly talk about right now and have since my late 40s about putting me in the home. I raised 2 boys and they're fairly aggressive and they're like, Dad, I'm going to put you in a home. It's like, okay, but could you wait, maybe until I hit, 70 before you go rushing me off in the wheelchair in the home. And, we have a good laugh at that, but it's one of those things where you think about, okay, when I get to that spot, if I've lost my mind, and dementia does run in my family, so odds are going to start, losing some of the marbles at some point here. And then it becomes kind of this downward spiral and, you just, you go out not in a blaze of glory. So at some point in time, you're going to have to leave your house. What does that look like? Oh, what a train wreck. But you know what? If I don't have all my marbles, I don't really care. So that's one of those things where I'm like, all right, how do you make that go? Well, maybe you set up a conservatorship. Maybe you're going and you're like, all right, estate planning, right? Estate planning. I started to do that not long ago because I was told, hey, you need to figure out what to do with all your stuff in case you die. It's like, okay, mortality. That's kind of wild. I don't know if you followed Prince, the artist, the artist formerly known as Prince. He just went by those, symbols like Led Zeppelin first album. Was it the first album or Led Zeppelin 4? I can't remember. One of them, they just had a bunch of symbols and people thought, oh, it's the occult. Prince left an estate of like 156 million or something with no will. He died intestate. He's got 6 siblings, I think, 2 of whom have died since he passed away. And he passed away from a fentanyl overdose. We didn't really know what that was at the time. But yeah, that's what he died of, a fentanyl overdose. Basically synthetic opioid. So, crazy, but his estate has been an absolute mess. IRS involved from the standpoint of they want to get their money for taxes on the estate. He's got royalties. He's got all kinds of crazy, real estate. He's got all kinds of just crazy stuff. But if you can, for your kids' sake, if for nothing else, if you're leaving anything of value, do a will. It doesn't even have to be a fancy one, but do a will. I've got a couple of corporations, and so it gets a little tricky when you've got that stuff. They're not really worth anything. They're just basically, well, who knows? They're ways to protect yourself, with the corporate shroud is what you're told. That's the way you're sold. And then the CPAs get to charge you more. And then you've got registration, you've got licensing and all that good stuff. And everybody's like, oh, you've got protection. All right. It doesn't really feel like I'm protected, but so you say, you go down those things. But if you can, do a will, because then you'll have less discrepancy about, well, Dad would have wanted me to have this. All right. Dad's gone. Dad's dad doesn't care anymore. And so you guys are going to have to figure it out. Leave a will if you can. That's kind of where that's the spot I'm at 53, and maybe update it every now and then. I was thinking the other day, was that in the will process thingaroo that I did a couple of years back, where I went through all my stuff that I don't really care about and itemized how it would go. All right, 50-50 here. And glad I don't have more than 2 kids, because you start splitting it up and, it gets tricky, but whatever. I'm also of the thought that the less you leave to people, the more incentive they have to do their own thing, right? So spend it now. That's another angle you can go as well. I want to incentivize you guys to work hard all your lives and be self-reliant. Therefore, Dad is going to Aruba for the next 18 years. We're not going to do that, but it sure sounds funny when you say it out loud. The house initially received the highest offer of about $1.4 million. And a probate judge ratified the offer, saying, all right, yeah, that seems good. Yeah, click, or bang with the gavel. No gavel goes click, does it? So this set off a roughly 7-week process after the ratification of the probate judge's offer, set off a roughly 7-week process where the house stayed on the real estate market, generating intense interest. I did not realize, is this a California law thing where you keep the property on the market, generating intense interest? Because when you go pending here in the state of Washington or in our MLS, it's pending. It's basically, don't touch it. It's, unless it's, pending, and they're looking for backup offers or something, something like that. But that's usually not a pending thing. So then we've got at auction, a probate judge set bidding at $10,000 increments. All right. That kept things low and kept 5 to 6 bidders in the game, Wiley said. 2 people ultimately went neck and neck, he said. And it's that auction environment that led it to go where it was. All right. So they're saying, one guy's saying, all right, I think I can still make money at $1.97 million. That's the bottom line, right? So they really wanted it, but the data point didn't support that sale. It was an anomaly, he said. Okay, but you've got, maybe it was an anomaly. Maybe it is the new standard for fixers in that neighborhood in San Francisco. Those are the things that I always think about all right, if it's an anomaly and a builder can still make money doing it, I mean, you've obviously got a market that is going to the moon, has been going to the moon for a while, and we know that about San Francisco. But at $2 million, maybe you put $500,000 into it. Now you're at 2.5. Maybe it sells for 3.5. You got 10% in closing costs. Maybe you've got, short-term capital gains in there. But you can still make a few $100,000. And on a flip, that's not such a bad thing. And I am throwing out just out of my rear end numbers here. I don't know anything about, the condition of this property. You can't really see the roof. Does it have a roof? We don't know. I would assume so. To me, this property didn't really look all that bad. Now, foundation, these are typically on slab foundations. So, you're going to have to level it out, but that's not an absolute deal breaker. It's just one of those things you're probably going to have to go through. You're going to have to do all the mechanical systems. You've probably got either drywall inside, or you've possibly got, another wall surface. It looks like the exterior of the home was wood frame. So you're just going to send a crew in there that's going to be doing prep work forever on the painting. You want to leave all the period detail in place because that's what gives it its charm. Who knows? There might be, restrictions on what you can and can't do because it's 122 years old. In San Francisco, that's not that big of a deal. The house my oldest son just bought in Madison Park in Seattle, I think it was, what was it? 1907. And we were doing the math on that. And I'm like, damn, son, you got an old house for Seattle. You got an old house. Because Seattle, a lot of the suburbs, most of the east side was literally built in the 50s. You didn't have much over here, Microsoft, Redmond territory, Bellevue. There really wasn't much over here, prior to World War II. There just wasn't. You don't have many homes like that because all the development happened in the core urban areas, just like in San Francisco. They just built those, super dense. Let's pack in the density to the point where you're not going to have the duplex or the triplex, or let's just add a mother-in-law on here because there's nowhere to add the mother-in-law on. It's already a 0 lot line attached single family home, right? So you own the little tiny plot of land, and on the 2 sides of the walls of your structure, those are the lot lines. And Seattle has gone to a lot of that from a density standpoint. And, they always try and convince us that, well, we're leaving a little bit of open area here so that all the residents can enjoy, but nobody goes outside. Kids don't play outside anymore. They don't need the big yard. They're all sitting inside on their cell phones or their Nintendo or their Xbox or their whatever the Sony one is. Or they're out with friends doing something. Kids don't really play at parks. I saw 4 kids that were probably early teenagers at the grocery store, and they were just kind of hanging out. And I was like, yeah, I don't see a lot of kids just hanging out anymore. We did a lot of hanging out when I was a kid because that's all we had to do. We had Bellevue Square in downtown Bellevue, which had just been built. That's how old I am. Bellevue Square is kind of one of those iconic, people come from Canada to go shopping there because it's got stores with overpriced goods that people apparently love. I don't get it, but I'm kind of particular on my consumerism, and buying Gucci stuff, that doesn't really do anything for me. Louis Vuitton, hard no-go. It's like, all right, yeah, you just look like a person who's spending way too much money on an overpriced piece of good. But that seems to be the way that everybody has gone. Real estate, the worst house on the best block, that makes sense to me. I'm okay with that. But, you just don't see people outside anymore. And so we've gone to this density thing where you just pack the homes in. And this is one of those kind of homes. And so at $2 million, maybe it is way overpriced. Maybe it's overpriced by a couple $100,000. But those builders, they do their due diligence. And that's a lot of what I've spent my career doing on the appraisal end of things for both builders, developers, homeowners that are going to do a proposed remodel. Okay, here's the plans and specs. Here's the house now. Tell me what the value of the house is now, and then tell me what the house is extrapolated 2 years down the road. And you do that looking at the plans and specs, and you draw up the sketch and figure out the square footage generated. Or in this house's case, you'd look at the specs knowing that the footprint probably isn't going to change. And you would go, all right, they're putting XYZ amount of dollars into it for renovation. Here's the condition now, which would be poor. It'd probably be not horrible, fall down terrible, but it would not be great, right? You're not giving it an average condition rating. And then knowing that it's going to be probably in between good and excellent when it's done, meaning that most of the surfaces have all been remodeled, but you've probably still got some infrastructure that remains. You've got some framing, you've got some flat work, maybe you've got some updated wiring you can leave. More than likely, you're going to rip out all the wiring. It's probably got old school wiring. It's probably got, outdated electrical panel, all that stuff. You're just going to rip out and start over because piecemealing that stuff. So at the end of the day, all right, we've got an updated, 2,158 square foot home that's in good to excellent condition. What do those go for in this neighborhood? That's what you do as an appraiser. And that's what builders do. They do the exact same thing. So if they're figuring that they can make money at $2 million, maybe they can. Now, where that logic breaks down is when the market goes south on them in a really quick time frame, like 2008, where, oh, ouch, all of a sudden we're dropping those prices to try and get stuff moved. And that is when you have when you've got a lot of inventory in the market and prices start to drop, then it's a free fall because everything gets chased on the way down. And that's the huge difference that we have in 2022 versus 2008 through 2014. Those were horrible years in real estate. And you're just looking at a sea of short sales and foreclosures. It was brutal. It just wasn't fun because you were working on other people's demise of their home ownership. And it just wasn't fun. So that's the enormous difference where we sit now with no inventory versus where we were in our most recent memories, having just a, free fall of value. So these builders are taking some risk based on the fact that there's nothing else available as far as inventory to buy fixer wise. And then also on the other end, when they go to sell it, you've probably got some appreciation in there. Maybe it's a 6-month build out. Maybe it's a 9-month build out, a year, who knows? Because if you wait an extra 3 months, and your property is appreciating at 30% a year like we had here in Seattle, guess what? It pays to maybe wait on a little bit of a cycle. So yeah, maybe $2 million sounds like an enormous overpay. But when I see those numbers, I'm like, all right, that is a lot of money to buy a fixer. And yet, does it make sense? So those are the things that I look at from my perspective. And oftentimes it does. And you're like, good Lord, what world are we living in? Well, here's the numbers. Okay. So now we've got a really nice fixed up, home in this area for $4 million. All right. Yep. That is the market. So that's one of those things. San Francisco being one of the most expensive real estate markets anywhere. So $2 million in San Francisco does not buy you probably $2 million in your neighborhood, wherever you're living. It doesn't buy you the same type of house wherever you're living in, unless you're in San Francisco. And the majority of you, per the YouTube comments, have told me that you've left San Francisco and you went to wherever you went. We get a lot of people here in Seattle for just this reason, that our homes here, this home in a really good neighborhood, 2,000 square feet, might be, in the condition it's in, if it has foundation problems, maybe it's low million, maybe it's 1.112, something like that. Maybe it's $1 million, depending on, what specific neighborhood. But, yeah, so people come up from San Francisco and go, oh, this is cheap. I'll take 2. Thank you very much. And so it's all relative. Or people come from New York, same thing. Oh, Seattle's cheap. Huh? Yeah, I'll take 2. I'll take a half a dozen. I'll take a baker's dozen. That always was like, what's a baker's dozen? Yep, that's a term. Okay, that's it for me on this one. I have beaten the worst house on the best block of San Francisco to death. All right. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. I'll catch up with you soon. We'll talk then. Bye for now.